talk a little bit more about area symbology here. We were trying to create some area symbology for this hazardous area. And we said it's going to be in this particular shade of red, not too specific here for teaching purposes. And then we made a swatch for it, just like we had done with previous colors, and said this is going to be our hazardous area. Well, what if our hazardous area, I'm going to hold down the space bar and go over here, is this region here? Certainly could be, but we have a problem here in that we have some hazardous land, we have some hazardous water, and then we've got hazardous land again. And it makes it very difficult to see because it's completely opaque and I'm covering up the area. So how would you go about fixing this? Well, what you might be tempted to do is say what we need is a transparent area symbol. Maybe we need to bump this down so you can see through it. And then that way you'd be able to see underneath some of the land and some of the water. So that sounds like a perfectly good thing to do. So let's investigate some transparency, but then also look at some of the problems and pitfalls that transparency has when you're trying to do cartography. Let's just go basic right now. So here I've got the object selected, which outlines my hazardous area. And then if you go over here, there is a menu for transparency. If you don't have it, of course, it's under Window. But under Transparency here, I can adjust the opacity of the object that's selected. Now, opacity is the opposite of transparency. If something is 100% opaque, has an opacity rating of 100%, it cannot be seen through. It's completely solid. If you go down to an opacity of 0%, you'll see it vanish. Still there, it's just now, this is the interior, of course, now it's just completely transparent. And then here is 50%. I'm going to turn off the stroke. There we go. So there, now I've got what looks like a perfectly good hazardous area. It's 50% transparent or 50% opaque, depending on how you want to look at that kind of thing. And it might appear to you that I've got a perfectly good hazardous area symbol for the map. And I might, but I want to give you a couple of pitfalls here. First of all, when I go back over to my swatches, I might want to make a swatch for this so that I remember that it's exactly 50% transparent in this particular color specification for this color red so that I can use it over and over again. I've really been stressing consistency here across different maps and so forth. So what if I do that? Well, I'm going to bring the fill color forward, and then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say New Swatch. And for the sake of example, I'm going to call it 50% red and say OK. Now there it is right there. Let's see what happens when I want to use it. I'm going to create another area over here that I also want to be hazardous, and then I want to apply that 50% red. Here's the hazardous red, and here is 50% red. Doesn't look like anything happened. Hold on. Let's go here and turn it yellow, so maybe I just missed something. So now it's yellow. Okay, so that does work. I want it to be this 50% red. I didn't get it. I got the same color red, but it didn't bring in the transparency. This is one of the first pitfalls to working with transparency, and that's that this alpha channel, the transparency, doesn't get picked up when I make a swatch like this. I think this is something that has changed in different versions of Illustrator. This is Creative Cloud, as I mentioned in the beginning, and it's not picking up that channel. I was working with some graphic design in other situations, and I believe they were using a version of Illustrator or Flash that would pick up that alpha channel, that would pick up the opacity when you create a color swatch. And I believe I heard him complaining that the latest version had dropped that functionality, and so that's why he was using an earlier version, because he liked having the transparency in the swatches. I believe I remember that. So if you're using an earlier version of Illustrator, yours might be able to pick up the alpha channel. I'm not sure why they dropped that, other than they did. And it's one of those things that you also need to think about if you've got different cartographers working on different versions of Illustrator. That could potentially be a problem if you're importing and exporting color swatches and so forth. So it might be a good idea, if at all possible, to make sure that all of your cartographers are working in the exact same version of Illustrator, and actually to make sure that the version of Illustrator that you're using is completely consistent across all of the different computers that you might be using. Sometimes that's not possible, but if it is possible, it keeps little things like this from changing on you. And of course, you also have to think about compatibility of projects when we save them. So there's something else to think about. So if you're using a transparent symbol right there, that's sort of the first sort of pitfall, that you can't just make a swatch for it in certain versions of Illustrator, and obviously in this one. So you're going to have to make a note someplace. You're going to have to note down that all of the hazardous areas are 50% transparent or whatever. Okay, so that's the first pitfall of working with transparency for area symbols.